Rome, 89 years before Christ. Beneath the marble arches of a senator's private courtyard, a young noblewoman named Julia Veturia was screaming. Her wrists were bound behind her back, her knees locked into a curved wooden frame. She had not committed treason nor adultery. Her only crime was defiance. She had spoken back to her husband. By sundown, she was stripped, strapped, and silenced. The senators called it discipline. The slaves called it horror. This device was new, carved not for criminals, but for wives. Rome had invented a machine to torture women into obedience, and soon the empire would cheer it. They came for her just before the evening lamps were lit. Julia Veturia had barely set down her wine cup when the footsteps echoed down the corridor. 4 slaves, eyes lowered, hands trembling, sent by her husband with no explanation. She was still in her stola, barefoot, her hair loosened for rest. "He requests your presence," one muttered. She followed without resistance. She already knew. That afternoon, in front of the household, Julia had refused to obey a simple command. Her husband had ordered her to drink a bitter herb. She had asked what it was. He had said it was to cleanse the womb. She had said no. Her voice had not trembled. The silence after was louder than a thunderclap. Now, as they led her into the Domus Disciplinae, she smelled smoke, not fire, but heated wood. The room was dim. Her husband stood beside an object she had never seen. It looked like half a barrel, curved and polished, with leather straps on its sides. "This," he said, voice calm, "is to help you remember your place." He called in a craftsman, not a torturer, but a carpenter, and instructed the slaves to strip her. She fought then, but it was useless. The straps closed in around her shoulders, her thighs, her ankles. The wood dug into her ribs. Her back arched unnaturally. She could not cry. She could not beg, not in front of them. The pain was not sharp. It was slow, creeping, like the ache of standing too long, but deeper. Her shoulders burned. Her hips throbbed. Her pride screamed louder than her mouth ever could. Her husband turned to the craftsman. "Mark this one," he said. "I want it named after her." The man hesitated. "You mean the device?" "Yes," the husband said. It broke her well. But Julia had not broken. Not yet. In the shadows, one of the younger slaves dropped his torch. The room flinched. For a moment, only the crackle of fire and the shallow breath of a bound woman could be heard. She stared straight at her husband, and though she could not move, she smiled. It was not warmth, it was defiance, and he saw it, and that, more than her disobedience, would be what he punished next. They called it elegant. That was the first lie. When the carpenter unveiled it, polished to a dull sheen, and rounded like a cradle, the senators admired its craftsmanship. But Julia, still bruised and feverish from her first night inside it, knew better. It was built to look harmless. No nails, no blood, no blade, just smooth, curved wood and leather bindings that felt soft before they cut into the skin. Her husband had called it a corrective. He claimed it had roots in Etruscan restraint rituals, or something the Greeks used for runaway wives. But this was something new. It bent the body without breaking it. It left no gashes to heal, only joints swollen and minds unraveling. Julia lay on a low mat days later, half conscious, her arms wrapped in linen. Every time she moved, her shoulder shrieked, but she had not screamed in front of him. Not once. That small silence cost her more than pain. The carpenter returned the next morning with parchment and ink, sketching the device from memory. Julia watched him from behind a curtain. She had not been granted the dignity of privacy, only the decency of shadow. He drew every angle, tested every strap. Her body, now trembling with fever, had become a prototype. The next version would have iron reinforcements, a locking neck brace, holes for the knees, so the bones would settle deeper. Her husband had already sent word to another magistrate. "She taught me how to make them yield," he had said. The phrase burned deeper than the bruises. Word spread quickly in Rome's upper houses. Not in public. of course only in whispers shared between stewards and secretaries, in bathhouses and brothels. Men who could not control their wives now wanted one of their own, not a new wife, a new device. Julia's name was never spoken in these exchanges. She was referred to only as the first. When her fever broke, she asked the slave girl to bring her water. The girl was silent, then gently poured the cup, careful not to meet her eyes. They watched. The girl whispered, "Not just the master. 3 other men." Julia blinked slowly. "They watched," the girl repeated. They laughed. The cup slipped from Julia's hands. She said nothing. Not yet. Her body was still too weak to stand. But her mind was sharpening. Somewhere in the walls of that house, a carpenter's blueprints were being copied again. Somewhere else, another wife had just spoken back. And soon, another scream would rise behind a marble arch. Julia could not stop the spread, but she could remember every face that smiled while she suffered. And if Rome wanted a spectacle, then perhaps she would give them one they could never forget. The room was warm with wine and whispers. Golden oil lamps flickered against the columns, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Julia stood behind a curtain, her breath shallow, her wrists trembling. She had been cleaned, dressed, and painted not for dignity, but for display. Her husband's voice echoed from the atrium. He was hosting senators tonight, men who drank deeply, laughed easily, and brought no wives. The device stood at the center of the room, polished and waiting. The new model. It was taller now, with metal clasps and a carved step for forced kneeling. They called it Disciplinaria Veturia, the Veturian discipline. No one mentioned the woman it was named after, but everyone glanced toward the curtain. A steward pulled it back. Light spilled in. Julia stepped forward. She was not dragged this time. That was part of the show, to pretend she was willing. Her stomach twisted, her knees weakened, but she walked. Not for them, but for herself. She would not let them see fear. The silence in the room shifted as she approached the device. The senators leaned forward. One licked his lips, another chuckled. Julia's husband gestured. She paused. A slave girl knelt beside her, undid her belt, and let her stola fall. The room inhaled. Julia did not flinch. She mounted the device slowly, feeling the wood against her shins. The leather straps tightened, first around her thighs, then her wrists, then her neck. It forced her head down, spine curved, arms wrenched behind her. The pressure returned that familiar ache in her ribs, the silent scream in her shoulders. But she made no sound. Her husband raised his cup. "Observe the effect," he said. She was defiant. Now, obedient. The senators laughed. One offered a toast. Another placed a coin on the table. "I wager she breaks before the 2nd hour." More laughter. Julia could not see their faces, but she felt their eyes cold, entertained, alive. The fire cracked beside her. Sweat rolled down her cheek. She was no longer a wife. She was a demonstration, a performance, a warning. Time passed slowly. One senator approached and asked if she could speak. Her husband grinned. "Only if you untie her." The room roared. Julia's vision blurred, her jaw clenched. She did not break, not when they threw fruit at her feet, not when someone reached out and touched her back as if she were an object. She did not speak. She did not cry. And when they finally unbound her, long after the guests had stumbled home and the wine had run dry, she stood up on her own. Her legs shook, her mouth was bleeding, but her eyes, when she turned to her husband, were colder than the marble beneath her feet. "Did they enjoy it?" she asked. He blinked. "What?" "Your show." Then she smiled, small and sharp. "Next time let me choose the music." It was no longer a secret. The cradle, once hidden behind villa walls and whispered about in the corners of noble houses, had become a fixture of Rome's darker appetite. Word traveled fast through the lower forums, where cruelty was currency and pain drew crowds. By the time Julia heard the news, the device had been moved from private courtyards into public courts, then into the lesser arenas near the river's edge. They didn't use noblewomen anymore. That would have been scandalous. Instead, they chose slaves, widows, and women condemned for blasphemy or rebellion. The law called it re-education. The crowd called it theater. Julia stood beneath a linen canopy, watching as a girl no older than 16 was bound to a new version of the cradle. This one was iron-spined, curved higher, with holes along the sides for tools. The girl had stolen bread. That was her crime. But it was not food they wanted from her. It was sound. They fed on the moment a woman stopped struggling, the slow collapse of spirit, the silence between sobs. Julia felt sick. She had come because her husband insisted. He sat beside her in a shaded box with other officials, sipping wine and pointing out new modifications. They laughed when the girl begged. Julia did not speak. She did not flinch. But inside her chest, something was unraveling. Later that week, she was summoned again, this time not to be punished, but to participate. The governor of the province had requested a demonstration from the original subject, the one they called the first. She was told she would be escorted, dressed, and protected. She would not be harmed, not physically, but she knew what they wanted: a public performance, a reenactment, a final humiliation. She stared at the messenger and asked if she could speak to the crowd after. The man blinked, confused. "A statement," she said. "If they want to see the woman who made the cradle famous, they should hear her too," he promised to ask. 2 days later, Julia stepped into the arena. Not the Colosseum, not yet, but a smaller theater just outside the city walls. The crowd roared at her entrance, not with hate, with fascination, as if she were a gladiator or a saint. She was neither. She was a mirror. The device stood at the center, its iron gleaming in the sun. Julia approached slowly, one hand touching the leather strap. She did not mount it. Instead, she turned to the crowd. She opened her mouth, and then she laughed, loud, full, unbroken. The laughter startled the guards. The crowd shifted. Some laughed with her. Some did not know what to do. And in that moment, brief as lightning, the power slipped, not from the ropes, from the air, from the spell. They had wanted obedience. Instead, they got a woman laughing at the thing that was built to destroy her. The next morning, her name was everywhere, not whispered, but shouted. Not Julia Veturia, the senator's disobedient wife, but the woman who laughed on the cradle. The guards could not stop the spread. The scribes copied it in margins. Bakers and beggars repeated it in alleys. Someone drew her face in charcoal on a public wall, mouth open in defiance, hair tangled like a crown, and for the first time, the device meant for silence had created a sound too loud to contain. Her husband did not speak to her for days, not out of pity, but calculation. His authority had cracked. The other senators mocked him behind curtained balconies. The cradle didn't break her, they said. It made her louder. In a house ruled by control, silence became dangerous. So when the summons came from the Palatine, from the emperor himself, it was not unexpected. The court wanted Julia brought forward, not to punish her, but to test her again. They wanted to see if lightning could strike twice. The chamber was colder than any she had entered. Marble floors, black-veined and slick under her sandals. Statues of goddesses with broken arms lined the walls. At the far end stood the emperor's representative, a man with soft hands and eyes like polished glass. He welcomed her with a nod. "We don't want another performance," he said. "We want an apology." Julia raised her chin. Then why the audience? Behind him, hidden behind columns, sat noblemen, officials, their wives cloaked in gauze, even a few foreign envoys. They had come to see if the story was true, if a Roman woman could humiliate power and survive. The cradle was there too, but this one was different. Its frame gilded,